All right, folks. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Muy buenos días a todos. My name is Veronica Cool. I'm the proud co-founder of Maryland Latinos Unidos. We've been around for 3 years. Welcome to our People Policy series, Creating a Pathway to Progress, Latino Education in Maryland. Now, as we get started on this conversation, we want to talk about how very important it is that we're sitting here today as a group. At MOU, we realize how very important education is, not only as a gateway for individual success, but as a cornerstone of community prosperity. That's why we're so very excited to announce that we're launching a summit series, our Latino Education Summit series. It's going to be the launch of a fourth-part program that's dedicated to addressing the critical concerns within the Maryland Latino community. So we hope you pencil in on your calendar next week. That's what Susan was mentoring for March 26th. It is going to be in person at Montgomery College in Germantown. It will be an exploration of the pathways to educational advancement and empowerment. But before we get that started, we're here today to prep, to talk about the things that are impacting our community with some very, very important and experienced experts that are in the community. So we're going to unpack a lot of information that talks about Maryland's Latino community. So let's think about the census. By the year 2020, 1 out of every 4 Americans are expected to be Latino. Today, we're sitting at about 19% of the total population, and that number is expected to rise to close to 27% by 2060. But numbers don't tell that whole story. The median household income for Hispanics in Maryland is about $58,000. That's 50% higher than the national average. But it must important, very crucial to know that this figure is still short of the state's median income of $70,000. So yes, Maryland is looking good nationally, but when you look at Hispanics within Maryland, we're still about $20,000 short the rest of the community. Within Maryland's public school systems, nearly 1 million students are enrolled. Latinos comprise 28% of that population. But schools that are dominant in terms of Latino population, high density of Latinos, they remain among the most under-resourced, underscoring the pressing need for equitable educational opportunities. Now, if we look at academic performance, recent data from Maryland Matters shows that 31% of Latino students scored proficient in 2023, 31%. That's up from 29% in 2022. However, those achievements must be put into place amongst the landscape of educational attainment. As of 2013, Maryland's Hispanic adult population boasted a college degree attainment rate of 21%, over 9% holding graduate or professional degrees, and 21% holding bachelor's degree. But we still have challenges. RAND.org's finding from 2022 show that 39% of Hispanic students were chronically absent. 39%, a significantly higher figure compared to white counterparts. Now, what do you think that does to their scores, their achievements, their graduation rates? So as we begin this conversation, we invite you to join us on uncovering the dimensions of Maryland's Latin community, and together we'll talk about income disparities, educational barriers, health inequities that we're facing. Throughout the collective effort, we're hoping to gain some insights to cultivate inclusion and support our communities. And thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to have a very healthy discussion with Antonio Tijerino, the president of Hispanic Heritage Foundation, and Yanira Rodriguez David, the community engagement manager for the Office of Advancement and Community Engagement at Montgomery College. Muy bienvenidos. Very happy to have you guys. Excellent, excellent. So we'll start with Yanira. Yanira, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about the role that you play in Montgomery College. I know you're very focused on serving the Latino community. What are you hoping, to achieve? Talk to us about the outcomes of your programming. And again, your introduction, then we'll go to Antonio and dive a little bit further.
Thank you, Veronica, for this introduction. I'm Yanira Rodriguez. I'm the college-wide community engagement manager at Montgomery College. One of the things that I wanted to get out of this is equity in terms of the services and the programs that particularly our Latina students are impacting or involved. As I don't know if the community knows, but Montgomery College has been designated a Hispanic serving institution. And again, 30% of the student population, the student Latine population, is Latine, which is definitely a big impact in terms of how we have to elevate programming, how we have to have representation and evolve in the different staff, from the front side, throughout different supporting services. Also, I represent our senior VP in our Presidential Equity and Inclusion Advisory Group, and I also contribute and oversee, that services and programming and processes and goals that we go along in our strategic plan are supporting our efforts. And again, diversity is our first priority for the college, as you can already know. And we are really happy to sponsor the Education Summit next Tuesday to continue our work in the community. But basically, equity and equitable services for our students and the community.
Gracias, Janira. Gracias, Janira. And Antonio, we are so thrilled to have you. Your work across the country is magic. The innovation, the creativity. I love for you to introduce yourself and perhaps share the Minecraft success.
Yeah, there's the thing in the background. Antonio Tejerino with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. I started 23 years ago. And as much as we do all over the country and parts of Latin America, I'm based in Washington, D.C., but I live in Maryland. So this conversation is very important to me. I've had 3 children, 2 of them currently in Maryland schools, and one of them is now in college, just heading over to San Diego State. So she went very far away. Even though I'm on the University Systems of Maryland board, she
They want their freedom.
She wanted to get away as far as she could. But I also have children that have learning challenges and dyslexia and ADHD and processing. And so I've been through, I know more about the Maryland school system than I probably want to in terms of IEPs and having to address some of these issues. And the first thing I think of is who doesn't have access to these resources, who doesn't have vigilant parents and that feel empowered, who doesn't have contacts at the county or state level to talk to about these issues. And I feel as though our community doesn't necessarily get those services and even understand that they exist. But in terms of the Minecraft game, we try to be as creative as we can in addressing the issues of our community and try to meet our community where they need. My big thing is that our community leads us. It's not the other way around. So we always try to stay malleable in terms of how we address these issues. And one of them was video gaming. Latinos over index. I know watching my kids, and Minecraft is actually a positive educational tool in terms of kids learning and exploring and building and creating. So we developed the first Latino themed Minecraft game called Latin Explorers with Minecraft, and it was played by 30 million kids across the world in 30 different languages. And it talks about our culture. Also has a parent's guide and a teacher's guide as part of the game. So that's also important, that it's an educational tool and an access point. We worked with the Kid Museum as part of it as well, that's based here in Maryland. And it's an actual privilege to be able to have ideas and have them come to fruition. I know a lot of people have ideas and may not have the platforms or the connections or the funding to make them happen. But thank you for having me on here. And Gabby is a friend and she asked me to do it. And Veronica, I've known you for many years. And Yanira, it's such a pleasure to meet you and everyone else on here.
Gracias, Antonio and Janira. That's amazing. That's amazing to have the representation in your perspective, respective institutions. It's definitely leading to change. I mean, Minecraft 30 million players. Love it, love it, love it. Folks, as you're joining us, as you know, is our tradition, our habit, our routine, please introduce yourselves on the chat. This is going to be an interactive discussion. So as we're chatting with our panel, we'll also be scanning the chat for questions so we can incorporate it into our discussion. That way we have time to include everybody. So kindly introduce yourselves. Where are you? County, location, your role. And please interact. Feel free to post your questions and your comments right on the chat. So for Antonio and Janita, we obviously have a lot of challenges. Just in your introduction alone, you rattled off some concerns. I mean, let's discuss, what are you seeing? What would you hone down as the top 3 problems? We know absenteeism is an issue. 34% of students are estimated to be skipping school. We're seeing some violence. We're seeing just insufficient resources. Antonio, you rattled off access, maybe not enough involvement from the parents. So we'll start with you, Antonio. What are you considering the top problems that we're seeing in the Maryland school systems as it pertains to Latino?
Okay, I'm going to give you my perspective. So I
Yes,
think
of course.
mental health, I think, is an issue that is not being addressed within our community. We are less likely to be insured. We are less likely to be encouraged as children to address these issues by parents that, for the most part, may not feel comfortable. There's stigmas attached to it. We have less likely to connect with a mental health provider or service provider that is actually Latino and has the cultural nuances. And I can tell you, once again, when we were dealing with this with our own family, even having the resources, even having insurance, the waits were 8-9 months, and that's that you have to figure out who the right person is. And I'm thinking of other families that don't have those benefits. So mental health, we have a greater likelihood of suicidal thoughts among Latina girls. Parents that aren't addressing their issues, that all gets filtered down. So I'm going to put that as a very big one. I say the other one that often we sleep on is access to the internet, to proper Wi-Fi. And we certainly unearthed this during COVID. But at this point, and especially in rural areas of Maryland and others, Latinos are least likely to have access to Wi-Fi, to broadband than any other, or technology, like a computer at home, than any other segment of the population. We did a study that was a national study, but included the state of Maryland, that Latinos were most likely to say they couldn't finish their homework or they had a worse grade because of lack of access to Wi-Fi. And we had teachers, as part of this survey, it was a national survey with the Student Research Foundation, found that parents were least likely to connect with the teachers, not because of a language barrier, but because of an access to Wi-Fi barrier. To not everything's done online. And then also let's not forget the literacy, which people built prisons around literacy rates, and only 22% of Latino 4th graders are at reading level. 22%. And I know that you rattled off a few statistics, Veronica. I am not going to celebrate that, oh, we were at 20 and now we're at 22. Not good enough. 22%. And it's less than half of what white students are in terms of at that grade level. So that, unfortunately, is a precursor to a lot of things in life. So you're trying to overcome things when you're in 4th grade that are going to impact the rest of your life because you're not proficient in reading. And that starts from the time that you're born. The more you engage with your parents, the more words you hear, the more letters you figure out, the more you're on your path. So this is something that starts actually from 0 to 6 and even prenatally. So there is a lot of work to be done for me in those 3 areas as a starting point, since you asked me to prioritize. There are many others I could name, so I'm sure I'm leaving some off that somebody else is saying, well, what about this, this, and this? She asked for 3. She asked for 20.
You followed instructions.
She asked
No,
for
we heard
20.
you
I
loud
could
and
give
clear.
you 20.
Followed instructions: mental health, access to the internet, and literacy. Janita, what would you like to add to that you consider the top issues?
Among other things, I would say that the low, the annual reports that we keep seeing on low reading and math scores, and how with the pandemic, do the absenteeism and students not able to go to school. What are we doing at the school system to provide, that support for reading and math? Because it is so important that, when students get to high school, if they don't have the skills needed, it's going to be harder for them to get an SAT scores, to go to college, to get a high GPA. But I get a lot of calls from schools, and we have a phenomenon of a lot of newcomers, right? Crossing the border, students being placed in the school system, and the career counselors call me and say, we don't know what to do with this Latino group. Can you come to the school and basically save us? So I get from the school system the impression that, well, they speak Spanish, we don't know what to do with them. So Montgomery College, you come and bail us out. So it's kind of like that stigma that, they speak Spanish, we don't see the potential, or and also the representation, which is the third phenomenon. Like if the students that have high Latino populations, they don't have the staff that look like them, that they can feel empathetic, that a counselor that is Antonio mentioned, a Latino counselor, like you're trying to resolve an issue with a counselor that I might not even comprehend materials in language. Like I'm a big advocate for language access. If you cannot communicate with the families, the students are being placed in a special ed because they don't speak English. I'm been working with families. They share the IPs. I was a teacher myself, and I advocated for parents at the school system because I was the only Latina in the school that I was working. So I lived firsthand the discrimination, how our families are so, they don't know, they don't understand the process, and the teaching them how to advocate for themselves. Like when you are at the schools, you need to advocate for interpreters. You need to advocate. These are the basics, right? Like it's not like you're doing anybody a favor. So advocacy is something that I encourage to our families.
And that's a really good segue, Janita, into early, K to 12 education. Both of you mentioned the fact that obviously you're out of school. Janita, you're in college. Antonio, you're sitting in a foundation. We're hearing this continue. So we know that if you invest $1 in early childhood programming, you get a payback of 9 times. Society benefits with more prepared children, which in turn become a more prepared worker. I mean, Antonio, you rattled off all those pieces. The Annie Casey Foundation did a report showing that children between 3 and 4 years of age, preschool age, Latinos, American Indian, and multiracial kids were less likely to be in preschool compared to, say, Black or white children. So we're seeing that 61% of Latino kids do not go to preschool. Now, the data is a little dated pre-COVID. We know that there's going to be some additional reporting coming up later, but if we're going by that, we have a huge proportion of our kids that are missing the very foundational content that will set them up for success. Again, Antonio talked about 22% of children in the fourth grade, Latino children, are at reading level. You're right, it's nothing to be celebrated. And the reason I highlighted that initial quote in the beginning was because the progress was only 2% and it was still 31%. What is that?
It's less than half of white kids. So we have half.
Correct.
We're under a deficit to start. If I could just real quick, Yanira,
Yeah.
you said something about representation. We 21% of our students in the state of Maryland are Latino, according to what I looked up, and only 4% of teachers. Now, just think of that disparity, how that's going to impact across the board parental engagement, cultural competency, and all of these other issues. So I just want to back up a point that she was talking about.
Oh, no, and we'll definitely talk about representation. As a matter of fact, in the discussion, we have an awarded Teacher of the Year, Edwin Perez. So at the very end, I'd love to hear from Edwin about what he's doing, and you can chime in the chat, Edwin. But you know, the issue of representation, the issue of lack of participation in preschools, the issue of you know, insufficient reading and reading at level. What do we do about governments and county, city, state, federal partners to aid in the improvement? What recommendations, what best practices have you guys seen? Because we have to start somewhere, obviously grassroots, but also
Yeah,
from the top
I
of the
mean,
house.
this is where I work around impediments. I it is so complicated in terms of the government side. We have a great governor that is coming off of PPP flooding into the state, and now it's not there, and his administration has to adjust. That's something that doesn't really get talked about a lot, and I think they're doing all they can, but we have the cuts have been dramatic in terms of some of these places. So I'll leave that to someone else to try to deal with the usual. I'm an impatient activist. I value my impatience. I value my naivete, my creativity, my recklessness in trying to address these issues. I don't have time to map out the perfect strategy or school reform and all these other things. I work around them. So when we're teaching 100,000 kids around the country how to computer code, it's because only 40% of schools have computer access, specifically in Latino areas. And Maryland, it's actually very well. I think it's one of the highest in the country in terms of that. But the Minecraft game wasn't just because I wanted a Minecraft character. It's because we wanted to make sure that educationally we were able to reach these kids on their levels. And that includes kids of the ages you're talking about. I'm on the board of the Kid Museum, where we use maker learning in order to supplement what they're learning at school. Shout out Cara Lesser and all these others that are actually bringing kids from all over the state in to the Kid Museum and offering these programs. And that's why I'm on the board. That's the representation that goes beyond Yanira and Veronica and Mr. Ruiz or Gabe Albarnos or Rafael Lopez. We want to make sure that we have that representation, so we are represented in rooms that we don't normally get invited into. But maker learning is very, very important, especially as kids of that age that may not have access to that. Chances are, if you don't have access to preschool, you're probably not going to afford the camps that you offer. So you're trying to figure out, how do you go the nonprofit route? How do you go the museum route? You have access to libraries and other programs that exist. I know Montgomery College does a lot of work for the community beyond just being an educational institution. So we need to be resourceful. We need to share these resources, Veronica, so that people understand that there is a kid museum in Maryland, that there are other ways of working around, that we do boot camps in terms of STEM boot camps, that we're doing all kinds of programs around making sure that they're not at a disadvantage by the time you're 4 years old, by the time you're 5 years old, by the time you're in fourth grade. The 4-year-old or 3-year-old that you're talking about, well, they're going to turn into the fourth grader that 80% aren't at reading level.
Yeah, that's really good insight. And you're right. We do have solutions there. And I do admire your lack of patience. I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for the system to catch up to us. So, Janita, thoughts on how we can get our government partners to hear these challenges and maybe support us?
One of the things that I think Antonio mentioned, community engagement, our mission is to go where the people are. So by having a holistic approach, I work a lot with the families, and I've been, since I joined the college, I was like, I think that, we need to, it's a totally holistic approach, a Maslow needs. If your needs are food, shelter, you need to see the whole story. Like a lot of participants, when they apply to the college, they get an M number. Like, you are not an M number to us. Like, to assess what's the situation and how can we serve you, we need to start early. And our strategic plan, our Dr. Williams, we talk about that, like started in elementary school, started way early before they go to high school, involve the parents, serve them where they are. And again, assess what their needs are and mitigate, create programming that support that. We created a computer literacy program because the county gave all these laptops, but guess what? They don't know how to turn the Chromebook on. So, I mean, we create all this great programming and we're going to give you internet, we're going to give you computers, but they don't know how to use them. So we established a computer literacy program. We established also job readiness programs for Spanish speakers and English speakers, because the community, they didn't know that we have a one-stop job center. Things like that, as simple as it is, we go to the apartment complexes, we go to the rec centers, we go to any place, even the churches. We go to the churches. Like you gotta reinvent the wheel and be a little bit more accessible. If they don't come to campus, you go where they are.
No, and that's masterful. For those partners that are on, we often, MLU serves as a bridge between the mainstream community and the Latino community. We're not interested in reinventing the wheel. We're not interested in creating something new when we already have beautiful, effective programming. Our goal is to amplify and to advocate so we can arrive at sustainable solutions. I mean, we heard resources rattled off real quickly. So I hope that you, as a watcher, listener, viewer, visit Montgomery College. The fact that they have a one-stop job center in Espanol, that the school created programming to address literacy, computer, and cultural gaps, is so that we can go to the community. If you're not aware of the museum, we'll make sure we put it in the chat that Antonio was rattling off. Because again, if our kids don't see these things, they will continue to be behind. And that takes us to our superpowers. So I'm an employer. I'm my own business, Cool and Associates LLC. We do Hispanic engagement, outreach, but I need staff to do that work. And it's really difficult to hire bilingual, bicultural folks. So this is where we can benefit and support the economy of the United States. We know from a lot of reporting that being diverse, being racially diverse, being culturally diverse, being bilingual are top skills that help you succeed in life. Can you guys talk a little bit, and we can do Antonio, Yanira, como quieran. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that diversity, that bilingualism supporting our incoming students, our workforce in the United States?
Go ahead, Yanira.
I think that because I'm in a sanctuary, I will say, at Montgomery College, Montgomery County, we celebrate so much of our diversity. I think it brings to the table that we can create and we can make it better. We can innovate. I think that
innovation.
We have a different vision versus when I joined an agency in the past, people say, well, this is how we work. Like you gotta adapt, right? And when we come on board, it's like we add the salt and pepper into the combo, right? It's not like arroz and frijoles. It's more like, like you add that spark, right? That is like, oh, we never done that. So you are changing the whole scope. And people get intimidated by that. I think that when we have a vision or a different kind of spice, right? It's kind of like, how
that innovation and that diversity definitely adds to it. Definitely.
How's that gonna fit, right? Like, I don't know, right? It creates uncertainty.
Creativity.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think that when you're persistent and when you keep that vision, maybe one door will close, but others will open.
Others do open. They do.
So
Antonio, thank you very much, Anita. No, I do agree that our differences, our diversity do lead to spark and to that innovation that we see manifested in much of what we do. I mean, a lot of Latinos, reporting says 15 times more likely to open up businesses because we're constantly seeing opportunities and we don't have the patience, como mencionó Antonio, to wait. So Antonio, talk to us a little bit about how the superpowers of being bilingual, being a little Latino helps.
I think identity is at the core of all of this too, and we have to be respectful for all the identity that we have within our community. It's complex. I think it's a superpower to feel as though you belong, and sometimes that means placing yourself in a position where everyone else has to belong with you. And we have to deal with issues of imposter syndrome. And what I hate the most is that our community sometimes will make our own community feel like they're imposters. If
Yeah.
you are a migrant and are being placed within the school system, if you're Black, Latino, LGBTQ plus, if you're somebody with a disability, if you're somebody who's of a particular religion, if you're somebody that doesn't speak Spanish well, then all of a sudden you're not Latino enough. If you're somebody that has fair hair or fair skin, but that's the beauty of our community, is we're like everyone and everyone is like us, and that needs to be celebrated. In terms of the importance of this diversity in our community, it also brings different perspectives where we sit at a lot of different intersections. And I think our community has to do a better job as feeling marginalized often as we have been. We have to make sure that we're not turning around and marginalizing someone else in terms of some of the issues that we have within our own community. But it certainly is a superpower to be able to speak more than one language and Spanish. But you know, we also have to look at when we're walking into a room that we represent everyone that isn't in that room.
No, and that's a real good clarifying point, that is not the only defining factor to being Latino, the language piece. We absolutely know that you can be Latino with or without the language fluency, that there's so much more. And whether you opt to teach your children or they don't pick it up, to the point of Yanira and Antonio, that different perspective, that diversity, that cultural flavor that you're bringing into a room, that intersectionality of our identities does drive a lot of innovation. I want to bring us back a little bit to a point that Antonio kicked off in his introduction about one of the priorities, one of the biggest challenges that is impacting our community. Just like he mentioned, identity and mental health, our children are really sitting at two different worlds. At home, perhaps the parents aren't fluent, perhaps the parents aren't acculturated, but we're truly seeing a gap between what they're living and what they're seeing. And that's driving challenges. Again, Antonio mentioned some stats about suicide attempts, but there's some recent reporting that shows that suicide rates are much higher, 30% higher for Latina girls in high school than they are for white girls.
Yeah.
In 2018, Latinos were 50% less likely to receive mental health treatment. Now, that's also before COVID, probably higher now because of everything we've discussed: less insurance, less access to insurance, low literacy, low health insurance literacy. So let's talk a little bit about that perspective. I know you both started chatting about identity and just not gelling, parents not knowing where things are. Maybe they don't have Wi-Fi. Maybe, I know culturally speaking, my parents never questioned the teacher. They didn't come to parent-teacher conferences because they thought I was doing great. I was doing good, but they didn't come because what am I? What skills do I have to question a teacher? They're the expert. So they were never aware that this was a two-way street. And by hearing about their kid in school, they could reinforce behaviors at home. Even if they didn't know the homework, they could be supporting me. They didn't know because the teacher is at this level of expertise. Why would I question them? But we also have the challenges that have been discussed: the Wi-Fi, the lack of computers, the lack of language access. But mental health is a crisis. And I like to hear some best practices around how we can help our children. What are schools doing? What are programs out there outside of schools doing to address these gaps that we're seeing in increased anxiety, increased mental health? Other than advocacy, we know that's a big, big piece, but I'd love to hear your expert thoughts on this piece. Janita, we can start with you. Antonio, whoever's ready to jump in.
Antonio, go ahead.
As somebody that's a parent, which is what makes all of us experts in this space, and unfortunately that we get pulled into a lot of these areas. One is conversations with our kids that I didn't necessarily have that when I was growing up. I definitely am trying to foment that as a parent, and I sometimes by being children, we know we have the benefit of knowing what to take from our parents and what not to take from our parents. And so I do think that just establishing a conversation with your children, that if you see something that normally makes you feel like this is a crisis and you can't act like that, you have to find out why it is that a child might be cutting themselves, might be pulling their hair out, might be writing certain things that you discover in their rooms. And you can't do it as, at least my suggestion, I want to be respectful of how parents raise their children. But when I had to deal with some of these issues, it was, what is making you feel this way? As opposed to, what are you doing? Also have to, so the first thing that starts is open dialogue with your child and having conversations. The other part of it is making sure that you are trying to get help.
Yes.
And I love all
Normalizing it.
normalizing it, because it's no different than a kid that has juvenile diabetes and has to get help and support. You want to make sure that your child is getting that access to healthcare. That's more difficult when you don't have insurance, when you don't have Spanish speaking mental health providers that you can then talk to about it. And the ones that are out there are going to be as expensive as the ones that don't speak Spanish. So there are places, for instance, in the state of Maryland, that are places like Clínica del Pueblo, Mary Center, and other places that you have to find that might offer support for them. And unfortunately, there's no directory, and I tried to build one out. I talked to Cheryl Aguilar, who I know is in Maryland, and others that we're trying to figure out how to actually create some kind of a directory for people where they can go to a place that is culturally relevant. The other part is, I mean, as much as we try to monitor social media and try to monitor their friends, all you can do is make sure that try to do whatever you can to make them out of harm's way and to build a foundation in them that makes them feel comfortable coming to you if they were going through something. And those signs that appear, address them in a way that you're working with them, that you respect where they're coming from, that's making them feel sad, that's making them feel desperate, that's making them feel as though they're in despair, and the anxiety is real. I mean, I had and I didn't know what it was then, but I had panic attacks that I had no idea where they were coming from, why they were happening. Now I know how to address it, but my children have them. And you have to also advocate on behalf of your child when the nurse says, well, there's nothing wrong with them. No, it's real. If you've ever, and that is the most difficult part, is when you have to advocate for your child, even with someone you think knows more than you do, because you know your child better than they do.
And those are some powerful words. Janita?
I was thinking, I'm a first gen student, and when I was growing up, all the energy was into the family business. As an older daughter, older cousin, it's a lot of responsibility to keep that boat. Like I was feeling the pressure to be a role model, to work, to be the super hermana, super supportive. And sometimes within the Latino community, it was kind of like a tough it up. Like, you don't cry. You gotta keep on, it's kind of like you're the lead, right? And at some point it's hard because you're absorbing and absorbing and absorbing. And by then, I was reaching out to teachers and to counselors and to help, because I was afraid to even convey that to my parents, because I had to be tough. I had to be the perfect sister, daughter. And those type of situations, you can, if you don't ask for help, it creates a lot of trauma. And I'm glad that now the students at school, they have peer-to-peer, they have mentorship opportunities. The college, we have a student health and wellness center for success, in which we do mental health services, we do peer-to-peer. From the equity and inclusion team, we do have mentorship opportunities that we can work with students and follow their pathways. Because when I came to this country, I didn't speak any English. Went to school, and we go through so much trauma that people just take it for like, okay, you just flew and enjoyed the school and went to college and you're in a leadership position. Everything looks great, right? But you don't know what people are going through with the imposter syndromes, with that doubtful mentality that is this good for me? So it's really a nerve-wracking process. But I would say mentorship. I am a big advocate of mentorship. I'm a big advocate of mental health resources and a connector. Like when students come my way or families come to me, I make sure that they get the information, they have that accessible to them.
Well, and both of you, this is a phenomenal segue to close us out, so you guys can start preparing your questions if you're not already in the chat. But we've modified our offerings, between the foundation, between the college. And by the way, I want to emphasize that Montgomery Community College is the only Hispanic serving institution in the state of Maryland. So that is an incredible resource. I had no idea how much you all offer that was catered to the needs of our communities. And if you guys were not paying attention, one-stop job workforce, peer-to-peer resources, mentorship programming, following pathways, counseling centers, all with either the bilingual or the cultural lens that our community needs. So Janita, I thank you and I congratulate you, because you guys are doing the work that our kids need, even our adults need. But I want to move us to resources, to best practices. A lot has been mentioned. A lot is being posted on the chat. I do want to shout out our Maryland Latinos Unido committee member, Ana Carrera. She works with pro bono counseling. They offer free, let me say it again, free bilingual mental health support. So Antonio mentioned something about creating a directory, having access to resources. Maryland Latinos Unidos is working on that. That's what a lot of our members are in terms of resources that can be amplified and shared across the state. So kindly do put your contact information, share your programming on the chat so that we can continue to build on that content. But I'll bring it back to Antonio to talk about what other best practices can parents, community leaders execute on that can help us close this educational gap. And then we'll open it up to questions.
I think parental engagement is going to be very important, even if it's just to be supportive as in offering encouragement and letting your kid know that you are part of their journey. I cannot help my kids with certain homework. I went to school a very long time ago. I myself have had learning challenges. So there are certain things that my mind just turns off, and I can help them with certain homework. And I'm sure there are a lot of other parents as well that might feel intimidated by a middle schooler that you can't help with their math homework because I don't know geometry. However, you can sit with them. You can Google things, you can engage, you can encourage. And so I think there is something at home that you can do. Tutoring is unbelievably expensive. It's extremely helpful, but most people can't afford it. And I wish there were tutoring programs that were offered, and I know that we offer some, but that is something that should be looked at in terms of statewide to support the 1 in 5 being on reading level, that you need to look at it as an absolute crisis in terms of reading levels, to have a crisis reaction to it by offering tutors. I think also identifying after-school programs that exist.
Yep.
There's a lot of amazing nonprofits based in Maryland. A lot of work that right now, as I'm watching the chats, there's a lot of resources that we have. Our community may not know about it. And that's why, Veronica, your work and Gabby's work is so important. But we need to make that. And then identify other ways, like I said, the Kid Museum and other making areas. I know
Innovative options, yep.
I'm on the board of Crittenton Services, for instance, and they work with Black and brown girls that are at risk. Look up nonprofits that are doing work. Mary Center, like I mentioned earlier, they're all doing great work. Identity does great work.
Mhm.
And so we need to make sure that we have we have access to these resources. And so I do think there's a lot of, I am nonprofit. I don't know what that means, Claudia. But I just saw that pop up on me.
It's all good. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
But I do think there's a lot of things that we can do to work around the school system, because if you're sitting around waiting for school systems to get better, you're not impatient enough,
Not-
because your child is going to be pushed through. And I want to make this clear too. I think the school systems are trying to do all they can. I think teachers are overworked and underpaid and undervalued, especially after COVID. I think school boards don't
Yes.
have our representation, which means that
Yes.
we don't necessarily have our best interests at heart.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
I think that we have to really, count on amazing leaders that we have in the county, and also that we are able to support, the governor, who I think is
Mhm.
trying his best. Part of that is by being in front of them and making sure that they understand the unique needs of our community. But at the same time, we've got to work around it, because
Get the things done.
you
Yeah.
can't wait around for anyone to help your child. That is your responsibility.
Yep, yep. Janita, would you like to add?
I wanted to add that also I agree with the parent engagement, but also assess and ask questions about, what opportunities, how to pay. For example, our Montgomery College youth programs from the continuing education WDCE, there are scholarships for summer camps. We have an Ignite Hub, the innovation center that students and community, they can learn about technology, how to do an app on your phone. Those services are free. You just have to make an appointment, go to the center, and experience. Campus tours. Community engagement is doing campus visits. And we bring families to the college. We bring students and create an experience. How can we motivate our students to get in STEM careers? By having the experience, getting the hands-on on campus. We're having an event actually on the week of the next week, spend spring break with us. And families can have the opportunity to come to campus, have a tour, schedule a class visit. Those are the opportunities that we have to promote within our communities. So we are not waiting until students get to high school to start the career exploration, to talk to the students about FAFSA. The work and the resources is available. We just have to make it accessible to the community and spread the word.
No, I love it. I love it. We have a lot of comments and a lot of questions that I'm so proud to see. You guys definitely follow instructions. Cannot thank you enough. Between programming, between free tutoring workshops en español, between advocacy training with the Disability Center in Susana Barrios. There is a question here. I like to just make sure we talk this through. Representation. So if I condense our entire discussion and you walk away with a few things, I heard advocacy, we're under-resourced, we must think outside the box, and we must have representation. Again, big buckets. A lot of our pieces will fall into those buckets. But one particular question from Ellen is representation. If we do need support from the Hispanic community, engagement in the Hispanic communities and our board, where do we go? And where do we go to recruit? Where do we go to attract diverse board members? Would you guys like to chime in on that? Is there a trick to that? I know that it's networking, but any quick, brief thoughts on how to recruit Latinos to ensure we have representation? Either one of you can jump in.
Yeah, I mean, there's talent everywhere. Look at our circles, Veronica, and I think that that I know that I've been part of several groups that gather, for instance, at Gabe's house and at other places.
Yes, yes.
That is where you can look to see the talent. It really is tapping into who you know and asking. But there should be and I know they do this in nationally, but there should be almost like a directory of those that would be interested in it. I get reached out to all the time.
All the time. And we pass on right. If you can't do it, you pass it on.
Yeah, and you actually think of people that would be great, like Carla Silvestre, and we have Gracie on there, Gracie Oven and Rivera, and there are hundreds of those you in the state of Maryland, more, probably thousands, and we just have to be able to pull these groups together. That's not a hard thing to do, especially some of the kind of Latinos in Maryland groups, or including the group right now that you and Gabby are working on, Veronica. We just start gathering a list.
And that's work.
Yeah, and I'm sure they already exist, but I'm just saying that would be the answer to me. Now, the training part of it, I mean, at this point, you can Google what it's like to be on a board, and I mean, the biggest training is that you care and that you represent a community. And experientially, you know, what somebody is going through that you're trying to serve. And that to me are the biggest requirements. We're all smart. We can figure the rest of it out.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I have one big question that I can offer to Janita and Antonio. Feel free to chime in, but we're running out of time and I want to respect people's times. We had Erwin ask earlier on in the chat. There was a lot of focus on reading and reading literacy, but obviously we have a gap in math. STEM, as we know, is a really big thing. We heard about the Minecraft game and leveraging that for the sake of diversifying that knowledge base. Can we talk a little bit about bridging the math gap? What resources, what quick best practices are either one of you aware of that we can kind of reinforce with our attendees? Other than tutoring, other than participating in the programming, as Antonio mentioned.
Well, I'm sorry, Anita, you hesitated, so I'll just jump in and I will try to be very quick here, despite my heritage. So I will say that there's, for instance, I mentioned Kid Museum, experiential learning, making. Those are opportunities for you to address the math gap, which, by the way, is bigger than the literacy gap. So thank you for bringing that up. And math is how you basically, it's like literacy for the STEM fields. That's the base part of it. But there are other programs that you have to work around. Tutoring programs are great, but very expensive. There's also online tutoring programs and all kinds. And this is where AI, as afraid as we are of it, and should be. There was a case, I believe, in another state that they were pricing out a tutoring program that would have been up to $3,000 a child. Using AI, it was $20,000. So there are ways of using technology. I know that there's also programs on YouTube and other places where you can access, like Khan Academy and others, to supplement at home and also using technology.
I wanted to add that the college, Germantown campus, we hosted Identity. We do have a great partnership. We hosted, I believe, 50 middle schoolers. And they were in a special camp on math and biotech.
Okay.
And they had one hands-on opportunities. They did like a science fair, so they highlighted their work for middle schoolers, and that was really successful. So we do offer opportunities to
Love that.
explore.
I love that. So we are getting to the wire as usual. So real briefly, I like to have our panel just offer closing thoughts, super brief, and then we'll wrap us up. So Yanira, do you want to close us out? And then Antonio, super brief, guys.
I think that advocacy is super important. I like the idea that the lady presented the board. What is your cause? What is it that you want to resolve? What are the problems, right? I think that getting together and networking, like Veronica, I know Veronica for years, and we, you know, every time that there's any opportunity to collaborate, I put myself in. So you gotta put yourself out there. You gotta reach out. And Antonio, very nice. I follow you for years, and I'm so glad that we are here together this morning. I totally support your work as well. So be intentional. What is the problem that you want to resolve, and gather a team of colleagues that support your work.
Thank you, Yanira. Antonio?
Thank you very much, Anita. That is so kind of you to say. And Veronica, thank you for having me. And I see that my friend Dinora Olmos from Leaf is chiming in. They do amazing work as well. And they're up in Baltimore and other areas of Maryland where we have a burgeoning community. I'll close it out by just saying thank you. It's a privilege. It's a privilege to live in the state of Maryland and to know all of you. A la orden.
Thank you so much, Antonio and Yanira. Guys, this is how MLU, Maryland Latinos Unidos, is driving change. We do not want to work in a silo. We intentionally invite all of you to connect with one another. We will have a recording of this event that you can process later and dive in, because a lot of information was shared. You can't possibly digest it all. But please take a moment to scroll through the chat. Look at the partners you want to connect with so that we amplify each other's work. If you're not already a member of Maryland Latinos Unidos, please join us. That way we're informing ourselves two ways. What are you doing that we can grow? What are we doing that you can execute? It's always a partnership. I want to remind you that next week on the 26th, we'll be hosting the in-person half-day Latino Education Summit at Montgomery College. Thank you to Yanira. Talk about networking and leveraging each other. It's going to be in person, and it's strategic. We are mining for data. We want to hear you, see you, touch you, so that we can use this content to drive advocacy, to push legislation, to seek grander dollars so we can execute these programs that we're all addressing. So to close us out, I want to thank our panel. I want to thank you guys for giving us an hour of your morning, for being so passionate about our community, for understanding that this is an investment. This isn't just a feel-good, check the box diversity thing. Oh, but there's some Latinos here, let me show up. We understand and we appreciate that you know our community is here to stay and we're growing. But if we do not invest in our children, 1 in 4 kindergartners is a Latino. 1 out of every 2 babies being born is a Latino. If we don't invest in this work, in this student body, we will have a continued deficit. That's not how the world works. So not only do we bring the different perspective and we bring that passion, we bring innovation and we bring an incredible work ethic. So I trust that all of you got something amazing out of it. I know I did. I feel very empowered and very juiced up, and I hope to see you next week. So muchísimas gracias a todos por participar. Un abrazote grande, Yanira y Antonio. Muchas gracias.